What is Sitra Achra? It literally translates as the other side, or you could say the side of otherness. The idea of someone feeling that there's anything outside of God. So essentially anything that's not the holy side. How does Sitra Achra, the side of otherness, and extraneous forces get strengthened? By thought, speech, and action that are not consciously directed towards God to fulfill His will. The other side, or the side of otherness, includes all religiously forbidden activity and any ordinary acts not directed towards fulfilling God's will. So let's look at the distinction there. This means anything that's one of the 365 prohibitions, or just anything that's a mundane, permissible act, but the energy is not consciously being channeled towards God consciousness and bringing Hashem into the world. The holy side, on the other hand, includes anything where God's presence rests. That's what holiness means, a place where God's presence rests. So what is the key to getting God's presence to rest? Right? How do we infuse this holiness into our life? Bittul. Bittul means surrendering one's ego to God. So if you might be familiar with the word bittul, as it's used in lots of Gemara terms, or halacha, as the idea of something being 1/60th. So let's say, in a certain scenario, there's 1/60th of like this big meat pot with the tiniest little bit of milk. And so in some situations, depending, that little bit of milk could be considered batal v'shishim, 1/60th, and therefore it's nullified to the greater pot of meat because it really doesn't have its own existence. Of course, like this depends on various different factors, but that's usually how we associate the idea of bittul, is it becomes one nullified to something greater than itself. So let's get really clear here. Bittul does not mean that you're a bug in a soup. It does not mean that you're just being nullified out of existence. Actually, it means that you're being nullified into existence. It's stepping out of my worldview of otherness and separation and being fused into a greater unity. In Tanya's worldview, an experience of bittul, surrendering the ego to God, is a fundamental prerequisite to real living. It represents a departure from a personal consciousness that attributes separate existence to the self. To gradually embrace a transpersonal vision that sees all existence as embedded in a universe, saturated with the divine. Really, this is the idea of living with let go and let God, making more room for God within us. As long as I'm filling this space, there's no room for God, right? I'm just in that side of otherness. But as soon as I'm able to be bittul, I'm able to surrender, I'm making more room for God in my life. I'm making myself more of a vessel for godliness. Any shift of the animal soul in this direction, whether it be a mere willingness to listen to a higher truth, a purely cerebral appreciation of God's presence, or a total realignment of being, could be termed as bittul. Once bittul has begun, the ego is punctured and divine light can start to seep through the cracks. Intensifying the experience of bittul, which can occur at many different levels, requires a lifetime of spiritual work. So we're always working on this. We're always growing the idea of surrender and letting go. So bittul doesn't mean to become nothing. It means you become everything. You stop being a separate existence, and you dive into the unity of Or Ein Sof, God's infinity. Right? I could be my own independent existence, and I'm, the best person that I could possibly be, but I'm still just this independent existence, right? So as huge as I can become, I'm still this very limited little ant in this giant cosmos. Versus if I'm surrendering my wills to God, if I'm opening up my very ego to be a place for God to rest, then I become part of this greater unity. In that moment, we become everything. The Alter Rebbe, in a different source, not in the Tanya, but in one of his Mamarim, discusses the idea of bittul feeling like a letter in a word. And this is my favorite way to think of bittul. Is let's say you're the base in the word bracha, okay? You're the first letter. And you're like, who needs me? I'm not such a big deal anyways. I'm just gonna not be myself. I don't really even matter. So what are you left with? Racha. Nothing, right? You're not left with a word. You don't have anything left. Versus the base is like, I don't need nobody, right? I'm a base. Like, I'm the most important here. I don't need the rest of this word. I'm gonna go do my own thing. I'm gonna start my own band. The base is worthless. It's just a b, like not even. It doesn't have a vowel. Just a b. Like there's no existence to it. But to feel like bittul is to be a letter and a word, which means I am part of something greater than myself, and yet no one can do what I do, right? I'm absolutely indispensable. No one else can be the base that I can be, and yet I'm not just my own independent island. I'm part of a greater system going on behind me. I'm a person, flowing through time. I'm coming from somewhere. I'm part of a giant mission of bringing the world towards Mashiach. I'm not my own independent existence. I'm part of this letter. I'm part of this cosmic word of all of existence. And so that's the balance. I'm absolutely indispensable, and I'm just part of something greater than myself. So bittul does not mean you lose your personality, not at all. It brings out your most authentic self. So let's think about this for a second. There's another example from that Alter Rebbe brings in a different mimer. Is he says something phenomenal there. That the animal soul is pretty generic, right? Those qualities of the animal soul, that we think of our personality, they're actually pretty generic things that we all have different measures of. When it comes to the godly soul, though, we allow Hashem to flow through us, through our godly soul. Hashem's light is infinite. And therefore, Hashem's light is able to shine through every single person in its own unique way. Letting God's light shine through me is not going to shine the same way it flows through me as my neighbor or my friend or someone I've never met. Like, everyone is unique vessel for God's infinity to flow through in a finite way. Meaning, we're all able to be expressions of the divine light in our unique way. And so when do I really start to become me, my authentic self? When do I really become an individual? The moment I become bittul. It's the exact opposite of what we think. And the moment that I become bittul, I surrender, I actually am now able to be a vessel for God's infinity. And that's where new ideas and creativity and new possibilities and breaking through limits, after that new energy comes from, is from the bittul. So you have to let go of the ego, of the animal soul personality, in order to let our true godly soul, uniqueness and creativity flow through us. So this is also really just having an idea of surrender, right? When I stop trying to control everything, I can let go and allow God to flow through me. My favorite way of when I'm just really heated and so in animal soul control ego mode, just to bring myself back to bittul, is saying, thank you, I let go, I trust. And I don't necessarily mean it when I say it. I'm just saying those words to let my godly soul kick on and really remind myself that my true state is a state of bittul. Thank you. I let go. I trust. Bittul opens an individual to God, regardless of whether it's an active, conscious bittul, as is always the case with the supernal angels, who are constantly enraptured by God's presence, right? So it's a very conscious bittul with the angels. They're willingly giving themselves into godliness, or even if the bittul lies dormant. The lowest level of bittul is subconscious, but merely possessing a divine soul means I have the inherent innate capacity for bittul, to really just give into the unity. Having godly soul means even the subconscious resources of my soul, I have this ability to give into the unity. So because every single soul of Israel has a godly soul, they possess the potential for complete surrender to God by giving his or her life in martyrdom for God. So the ultimate example of complete surrenders, even to the place of giving up our very life, of I'd rather die than die. Meaning, if I'm going to do something that's against God's will, right? Someone's being asked, God forbid, to convert to a different religion, and so they're going to do something that's going to disconnect them from the source of life. They'd rather have a physical death than a spiritual death of being connected from the source of life. And that's the ultimate source of bittul, of just completely giving their will, their body, their everything in. And the reason they're choosing to do that is because they're actually giving into the unity. They're not giving themselves up. They're really choosing their authentic self, which is their soul that always wants to be connected to its source. So famously, we have so many examples of this, especially if you read books about Jews in Soviet Russia. Those are my favorite examples. There's so many examples from history, but a recent example, is the famous quote from Daniel Pearl, who said, my father's Jewish, my mother's Jewish, and I'm Jewish, right? Someone who in that moment, push comes to shove, he couldn't necessarily explain why. It wasn't because he lived a life of constantly being involved in Torah and mitzvahs, but when push came to shove in that moment, he couldn't help but just give into the unity. He said no, meaning could he necessarily even explain where it comes from? I don't know. But in that moment, the essence of the soul comes out and the person says, I'm Jewish, right? I lived it, I'm going to die a Jew. And that is the essence of the soul being revealed. That's the innate, dormant ability to really just want to give into that unity of godliness more than anything else. Even more, the animal soul's innate desire and drive for self-preservation. That's how powerful this dormant idea of bittul in our soul is. Now, of course, we do not just want to activate the bittul when we're being asked to, die for God. We want to use our bittul to live for God. We want to live with God every single day of our lives. Remember, if I have the ability to die for God, I definitely have the ability to live for God. This is why our sages have said that even if one individual sits and engages in Torah study, the divine presence rests upon him because of their innate bittul. So we said holiness is the ability to allow God to rest in a place. If God can rest there, it's holy. And so because there's innate ability of bittul, of really having this space that allows us to let God rest in us, if a person's involved in kedusha and Torah study and prayer, in that moment, God is resting on them and there's that state of holiness. Also, on each gathering of 10 Jews, the divine presence rests. And this, interestingly enough, of 10 Jewish men, if they're gathered together, even if they're not gathering for Torah and mitzvahs, right? They're not gathering for holy purposes at all, even. The divine presence rests because of their inherent ability to give into the divine will, to be in that state of bittul that allows the Shekhinah to dwell on them, right? Even if it's just in a subconscious state. So where does such an entity receive its spiritual energy and life force from, if it's not from God's holiness, right? Where does Sitra Achra, where does the side of otherness get its life force from? If there's only God, and we don't believe that Sitra Achra, that evil is really outside of God, then where does it get its life force from? Right? It has to come from God, because there's no other source. So, what dimension of godliness, so what tool is God using to, feed this other side? So it's not from the panemius, the inner aspect of holiness, that's for sure. It's not from its very essence and core, but from its acharayim, its hinder part, so to speak. So when you give someone to someone that you love, right, you're going to look them in their eyes, and really you're going to be giving them the thing, but also you're going to be giving them you. You're going to be giving them that moment of connection. But God hates evil. He hates Sitra Achra. So when he gives them life, he gives it over his shoulder. And the reason being is that, so to speak, when God gives life force to the extraneous forces, to Sitra Achra over his shoulder, is basically denying them any face-to-face intimate connection with him. He's giving them life, because if not, they wouldn't exist. And if not, free will wouldn't exist. But he's giving them in a way of not having a deep, intimate connection with him. So when you face someone, you're connecting. God doesn't want to give the Klippa's inner energy, so he doesn't face it when giving them life. Klippa is something that's enlivened by God, but feels independent. That is because its energy comes from over the shoulder. Meaning, let's say you're getting something from someone, but you never even met them. So you don't really feel like you're receiving from them. You really just feel like you're standing on your own. So because Klippa, so to speak, never met God, it never gets that experience, that face-to-face experience, it feels like a hotshot. It feels like, it's kind of like the kid who goes off to college with their parents' credit card, and they never call home, but they're always shopping, it's like, oh yeah, it's my money, funny, and so they're not actually having an intimate connection where they're actually calling their parents and say thank you. That'd be kedusha. They're just taking and denying the source of where it's coming from. That's the why Klippa feels like its own independent source, because it's not receiving from God's panemius, God's inner essence. It's receiving from God's external dimensions of godliness. This limited form of life force reaches the Klippa by descending degree by degree through the myriads of levels in the chain-like descent of the world, Seder Shalshalit, in the manner of cause and effect. The vitality ascends also through many simsumim, or contractions, and this process diminishes the vitality to the point where it's comparably lower than its original state. So it's also the quality, meaning it's being so diminished, this life force. It's not getting this blast of awesome energy, the Sitra Achra. It's getting very, very, very diminished, weak, almost unhealthy. By the time the energy gets to it, it is so diminished. And that's why Klippa is also, it's always hungry. That's why it's always after Kedusha, because Kedusha has so much light. It's receiving from God so face to face. It's Klippa is always starving. It's give me. So greatly diminished does the light and life force become, diminution after diminution, until it's able to become contracted and clothed in a manner of exile. Separate from holiness, giving it vitality and existence, causing that object to pass from non-existence to existence, so that it does not return to its original state of non-existence, as to it was before, is created by the vitality enclosed in it. So there, a really important point is coming out there. That, of course, God is creating it. Meaning, if God wasn't creating it, it wouldn't exist. And for Sitra Achra to exist, Hashem has to be enlivening it every single moment. But the way Hashem enlivens it, it's so many simsum, so many contractions, and it's over the shoulder in a way that the life it's getting is such a diminished quality that it feels like it's not even receiving from the source. It doesn't even really feel its source anymore. The natural disposition of physical beings is to sense their own autonomous existence and see the world as having inherent reality outside of God. The predominant energy of the world, then, is the Klippa and Sitra Achra. This is why all the affairs of the world are severe and evil, and the wicked prevail in it. Meaning, in this way, the Klippa in a way has a leg up. And the reason being is because if you want to receive from Hashem face to face, Hashem's going to give you what you really deserve. But if Hashem's I don't even want to deal with you, so just take the money and go. In a way, Klippa does get an extra boost of energy in that way. Meaning they get more. They get abundance, but it's not quality. Meaning, either I could really get something from my father, and I get the $5 I really earned, and it's a face-to-face intimate connection, or just take the $1,000 and get it in my face. And so in a way, Klippa has that advantage. I mean, if I want to get rich fast, yeah, Klippa's the way. If I want to live an honest and integral life, Kedusha's the way. So there are two categories of klipa, one lower than the other, and these are major concepts in Tanya. So first we're going to talk about the lower category. The lower category consists of 3 completely unclean and evil klipot containing no good whatsoever. This is called shlosh klipas hatameas, the 3 impure klipas. And let's look at where their source is from, okay? The 3 impure klipa. In the prophet Ezekiel's vision, the divine chariot, in which he saw and described the forces that conceal godliness, they are described as a storm wind, right? First one is a storm wind, a great cloud, and a flaring fire. There are 3 completely unclean and evil klipot containing no good whatsoever. So those are the 3, okay? Storm wind, great cloud, and a flaring fire. What is created from these 3 impure klipot? From them flow and are derived the souls of all the nations of the world and the sustaining force of their bodies. The soul of all living creatures that are unclean and forbidden to be eaten and the sustaining forces of their bodies. The existence and the life of all the forbidden vegetation, such as orla, and a mixture of grain, seeds, and a vineyard, right? Different forbidden foods. The existence and the life of any act, utterance, or thought in violation of any of the 365 biblical prohibitions, as well as the rabbinical offshoots, as they all derive from 3 impure klipas. So let's understand a few things here, okay? In the spiritual world of Tohu, where those spiritual energies fell into this world, whatever was higher fell lower. So we need to appreciate that these things, these forbidden things, they actually have a very high source. So she wouldn't just cast it off as like, meaning we're saying that there's no benefit derived from them, but we need to appreciate their source. They actually have an incredibly higher source, because if like my arm's here, my arm falls, right? Whatever's higher falls the lowest, okay? So whatever had the highest spiritual potential in Tohu, it fell down to this world. And there was tremendous potential in them. Esav was from the world of Tohu, and that's why his father Isaac wanted to bless him, because he saw the immense spiritual potential that's within him. So this isn't about judging, right? This isn't about judging nations of the world. It isn't about judging this forbidden foods, not at all. It's about understanding the spiritual reality, so I know how to elevate it, so I know how to work with it, and also, how do I elevate something non-kosher? By not eating it, right? That in turn elevates it. And also in today's world, we talk about the nations of the world. The Rebbe was very clear about this. There's so many souls that are from Klipas Noga, which means that those energies are redeemable. Meaning the idea of someone being purely evil is getting less and less, thank God, in nowadays world. And so many more souls are in this place of just potential where they could be good or bad, and it's really up to the person's choice. So, really to understand that this isn't about judgment, it's about understanding spiritual realities. And also we have to understand, we're talking about klipa, we're talking about a selfish energy, right? So the idea of like so many things coming from the selfish energy, if you look at talk to any modern psychologist, like what is the pit of human drive, they'll say selfish motives, right? I want to self-actualize, it's about me. Or I want to like just preserve myself. Or really like even my needs to give is really coming from this self-centered place. And we're not judging it. We want to understand what the spiritual reality is so we can transcend it. First, we just have to have our facts on the ground, the Alter Rebbe is laying down, and then we can get more into idea of transformation. Okay, so we're going to continue on later about this idea of the other form of klipa. Thank you for taking the time to learn together.